Good afternoon to one and all present here. Before me, so many eminent speakers have spoken. I loved hearing all of their stories. I also want to begin with a story. I also sometimes call myself as a storyteller. So I think without starting without a story would be unfair. It wouldn't do justice to that. But I'm going to tell you a very interesting story. I think you are also going to enjoy it. Back in 2019, I was working with a conservation firm in Delhi. When I first joined, they used to make me do a lot of office work. They used to make me do drawings, they used to ask me to do reports and all. After a few months, they sent me for the first time on site. I'm a conservation architect. I love traveling. I love looking at heritage. So this was the best thing that could ever happen to me. I still remember the first time when I entered the premises of the great Govindgarh Fort in Amritsar. When I stood there in front of the majestic walls of Govindgarh Fort, I just was mesmerized. I looked at those walls made with Nanak-Shahi bricks and lime, and I just wondered how many stories are stored within these walls of this majestic fort. The stories of the kings that have reigned over this fort, how this fort was built to safeguard the Golden Temple from plunder and loot by invaders, the story of Maharaja Ranjit Singh and how he conquered and annexed this fort, or the story of Tosh Khana, which was the treasury of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, where he also stored the priceless Kohinoor. All these stories would have died if these walls were not standing. All these stories would have faded in time if someone had not preserved the walls of this fort. Now, what is happening with the legacy of our past? What are we doing with our heritage? Let's look at some examples. This is the Lotus Temple from New Delhi. It is a gorgeous structure made with space frames and shell roof cladded with white marble. What is happening to that white marble because of the effect of pollution? Let's look at another example not from India. The Times Tower in New York was not always this glass-clad building with billboards. It was sometimes a structure made with stone. The plight of all the sacred water management systems of India, all these historic water bodies. One example is the Rajo Ki Bawli from Mehrauli Archaeological Park. All of them dying slowly because of neglect, because we are not paying attention to our past. All of these monuments, all of these places, they form our culture and our heritage. Now, two very important words come here. The first one being culture. What is culture? Culture is the essence of who we are. It is all the art, the dance, the music, the monuments, everything that creates our lifestyle. Culture is something that creates our identity. The second important word here is heritage. Culture attributes are all of these: the attitudes, the behaviors, the customs, the beliefs, arts, rituals, music, dances, etc. This is the cultural wheel as per the UN. The second important word here is heritage. Heritage is something that we inherit from our ancestors, something that is passed down by generations to generations. Often, UNESCO also says that culture can be of two types: tangible and intangible. Let's understand what each of these words mean. When I talk about heritage, when I talk about cultural heritage specifically, we always think that heritage would be something like a monument, like a grand structure, like a stepwell, so on and so forth. We often forget about the intangible cultural heritage, our rituals, our oral narratives, our stories, our clothing, our languages, and so much more. The intangible cultural heritage is always neglected, but this intangible cultural heritage is something that breathes life into the tangible heritage. Our monuments would be nothing without their stories. The monuments without their stories would just be simple structures, mundane buildings without any value. Let me give you a very good example. This picture was clicked during Bastar Dashera, a 75-day-long festival celebrated in Bastar in Chhattisgarh, the state from where I belong to. Now this picture is very intriguing because it shows us multiple elements of heritage. Look at the palace here. There is a palace wall There's a gateway, entry gateway to the palace of Bastar. There's also a temple behind that gateway. You can see the flag, you can notice the temple there. All of these are parts of tangible heritage, but you can also see a chariot in front of that palace. You can also see a lot of people who are pulling that chariot, singing songs, performing dances in front of them. This is a very good example to understand heritage, because here you can see the built and the unbuilt. Here the palace and the temple are the built parts, the tangible parts of heritage. But the process of this chariot making that is constructed using wood, using the same technology, the same methods that were used 400 years ago in Bastar. The oral history, the narratives, the rituals performed by these tribesmen of Bastar, who are actually the indigenous people of this land, is the most important thing. So from here we understand how tangible and intangible heritage can correlate with one another, how they complete each other. Now the big question lies, how do we include these elements of heritage which are not from our time period, which are not from our era, in this fast developing world? To answer this question, it is very important to understand what is the meaning of development. If I ask you about this word called development, what does it mean to you? Can anyone answer what is development to you? Anyone? The first thing that comes to our mind when we speak of development is growth, it's progress. If I ask you to imagine in your minds the image of a developed city, what will be your first thought? What is a developed city to you? When I talk about a developed city, somewhat similar image crosses the minds of each and every one of us, because this is the image of a developed city that has been fed in our minds, in our ecosystems. City with soaring skyscrapers, with high-rise buildings, with metro, with wide roads, maybe a few parks here and there, but these high energy consuming buildings that are taking a toll on this planet. This is development for most of us, for most of the world. But is this development as well? The pollution of our sacred water bodies, which are the suppliers of water, suppliers of life, felicitators of life for so many of us. Is this also development to you? And what about this? Is this also development? There are always too many mouths to feed and very less food on our plate. When I tell people that I'm a conservation architect, when I talk about all of these things that I'm saying right now, people always ask me, what is your problem with development? Why are you so anti-development? I want to tell you that I am not against development. I am against the idea of destructive development. A development where we are exploiting our natural resources, exploiting manpower, time, energy and money to create things which are not long-term, to create buildings which are not sustainable, which are not going to help us in any way in the near future. Progress is mandatory, progress is necessary, and it is bound to happen. But at what cost? In this course of progress, we are demolishing our ancient sites to build skyscrapers. We are building new cities over cultural landscapes. We are just thinking of the short-term gains, and we are not focusing on long-term sustainability. I would like to take this opportunity to quote Mahatma Gandhi here. He wisely said that the earth has enough to provide for every man's need, but not for every man's greed. If we keep on going at this pace of the so-called development that we are seeing today, we will soon lose all of our cultural and natural heritage, and this will lead us down to a very dangerous path. This brings us to one of the most pressing issues of our time, that is climate change. When we talk about climate change, the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is natural destruction, causes or ill effects to the nature. But you need to understand that climate change is not something that only affects nature or the environment. It directly also affects the built heritage, the monuments, the culture. We often neglect heritage, both tangible and intangible, when thinking about climate change, when building policy for climate change. But we It is time now that we understand what are the ill effects of climate change on our natural environment. Let's take the example of Venice, one of the most beautiful, most culturally and architecturally rich cities of the world. In 2019, Venice faced the worst floods in the last 50 years. Scientists believe that if it keeps on going on like this, then we will soon lose the entire city of Venice because it will sink down in water. Years of history, years of art, years of culture, buildings, monuments, everything will all just be gone. It will cease to be a part of our society. Let's take another example of Angkor Wat. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Cambodia. Angkor Wat is also facing so many issues because of climate change. You can see so many defects coming on the walls of these majestic temples because of the effects of deforestation, dropping water levels, change in the hydraulic water management systems of Cambodia, and so much more. Is this the kind of development that we are seeking? I think the example of Taj Mahal is not unknown to anyone. This is one example that all of us know as Indians. Taj Mahal is also facing so many issues because of climate change. The white Makrana marble of Taj Mahal is slowly turning into yellow and brown because of acid rain and the effects of pollution. This is not the kind of development, this is not the kind of progress that we should go for. Now, you will be thinking that climate change is something that is just affecting the monuments. But I would like to bring to your notice that entire culture is affected by climate change. How? The culture, the sacred practices, the rituals, the traditions, the festivals, all of them suffer because of change in the natural environment and the natural climate. Sacred groves, sacred societies, all handed down by generations to generations, are becoming inaccessible because of environmental degradation and because of the effects of change in this climate. The indigenous tribes and civilizations that were dependent on stable climates to maintain their way of life are forced to displace from their natural habitat, from the forest or the natural lands that they were living in because of the effects of this deterioration of climate. I would also like to quote Sir George Santayana here, famous historian and philosopher. He said, "Those who cannot remember their past are condemned to repeat it." Now it is in our hands if we will embrace our past or we will just keep on forgetting it. If we allow our heritage to fade under the effects of climate change, we are not just losing stones and stories, we are also losing the lessons those stones and stories are trying to teach us. Now this brings us to the solution, that is conservation. When I talk about conservation, people just think safeguarding or saving things just for the sake of nostalgia. But conservation is not merely that. You also need to understand that the stories that we are saving, the monuments, the processes, the rituals that we are saving, they are informing us so much about our past. The true understanding of conservation resides in the idea of conservation, the idea of heritage informing our future. Conservation is actually innovation in the most sustainable manner. In today's society, we are spending so much money, such a huge part of our economy is going into creating innovative methods for sustainable building, sustainable architecture. We're trying to find in technologies that will help us achieve green building, sustainability, and so much, etc. But what we are forgetting is that our ancestors were building these structures in the most natural way. These buildings were the most sustainable that have ever been created on the face of this earth. Take vernacular architecture for example. Vernacular architecture is architecture for the people by the people, using locally available materials, local construction techniques, and built in the most natural ways. Now when I talk about vernacular architecture, we can actually learn from it because the buildings that our ancestors were building in vernacular architecture used to be warm in winters, they used to be cold in summers. These buildings were eco-friendly, they were sensitive towards the environment and provided a comfortable living area for the people. There are n number of examples exactly like this. Another way in which we can conserve our environment or building or act in a much better way is adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is repurposing our monuments. Just like someone was talking about thrifting and repurposing your clothes. Similarly, we can repurpose our buildings as well. Let me show you some good examples of adaptive reuse. These are the pictures of Haveli Dharampura in New Delhi. This was an abandoned Haveli, mostly encroached by the local people, dilapidating and in a very sad state. This project was taken up, some funding was given, they restored the entire Haveli, and now it is a beautiful heritage property that will live for at least 25 to 30 more years, if not less. Another example, the historic building refurbished into LIC office in Mumbai. There are some cities like Mumbai, cities like Chennai, Kolkata, which have engrossed into heritage conservation and preservation. Here, heritage is not something that they want to conserve and keep it aside, make it a ticketed monument for people to visit, for tourists to go. They have imbibed heritage in their personal lives. They have converted these buildings into living spaces where they are still properly functioning. Another example from Mumbai, the Ismail building housing a Zara flagship store. Another good thing can be the use of sustainable materials. For example, lime. Lime is a very good breathable material that can be used in our new buildings as well to construct in a more responsible way. Now let's look at the reverse. I am talking so much about conserving, reusing and restoring. What if we do not do that? When a heritage building is demolished, many surveys have been conducted. All of them say that a lot of energy is lost, waste is created, and in turn a lot of pollution is also created. When we destruct a building, all the embodied energy that is present in that building while it was there when it was first conserved is completely wasted. However, when we conserve a building, all that embodied energy is reused and repurposed into something that can be used in the present time. Jane Goodall once said, "What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make." So now you and me have this chance to decide what kind of difference we want to make in this society. Is the difference that we want to make positive, or is it just something meaningless which is not going to help our future generations in any possible way? Now you must be thinking that whatever I have said is something that needs expert intervention, that needs the presence of professionals. So what can I do as an individual? What is my role in the preservation of culture, in the preservation of past? First of all, it is very important to know your own identity. Psychologists say that people who are associated with strong cultural backgrounds have a very high sense of self. They have a very high self-esteem and self-worth. When we know about our culture, when we know about our heritage, when we know about where we come from, we have this enhanced image of the self. Secondly, as an individual, you can do so many things. The first thing that you can do is start spreading awareness. Start talking about it. Start sharing the story of the heritage around you. There are so many more things that I can list. Whenever you visit a place, try to go to all the heritage buildings around you. Try to support the local artists, the local craftsmen who are creating crafts using processes that have been passed down through generations in their families or in their communities. When you are creating a new building, try to use vernacular materials like lime, like mud, like bamboo, and so much more. Use a sustainable lifestyle. Create a lifestyle for yourself which is more sustainable than others around you. In a similar way, you will also inspire change. Next is learn about all the policies, all the laws that are framed to preserve heritage and culture. Photograph your heritage, tell the stories, talk about it, write about heritage, document it. When you do all of these things, you will create a positive change and the world will slowly come to a state where climate change won't be such a big problem for all of us. Together, let's ensure that our past informs our future. Let's make conservation the foundation upon which we build our tomorrows. That is my time. Thank you.